They said her beauty could quiet a storm, and it was true. Lena turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Her skin was like porcelain, her hair as black as a raven's wing, and her eyes carried that haunted shine only someone who'd seen too much too young could hold. Her mother died when she was only 9, and her father, well, he didn't stay broken-hearted for long. Within a year, he brought home a new wife, Claudia. She had a fake smile, a tongue dipped in honey and poison, and a soul black as coal. Lena knew from the first day that Claudia didn't love her father, and she certainly didn't love her, but her father was blind with love, or lust, or whatever kind of magic that snake of a woman had used on him. Within a year, her father started to get sick. Doctors couldn't find what was wrong, and Claudia acted the grieving wife long before he even died. When he finally passed, the house grew colder, the paintings were covered, the curtains stayed, closed, and laughter became a memory. Claudia took control of everything: money, staff, Lena's life. She was 17 when her stepmother first mentioned marriage. "You're a burden," Claudia said one morning, stirring her tea like she was mixing poison. "I have mouths to feed, a house to run. You're not a child anymore, Lena. Time to earn your keep." Lena's hands trembled. "You mean work?" "I mean marriage." Lena froze. To who? Claudia's smile widened, slow and cruel. To someone who doesn't care about your name or status. Someone who's willing to take you, even with your father's debts. "What debts? My father was wealthy." Claudia waved a hand. "Well, things change, and lucky for you, I've found someone. His name was Baron. He was short. Not just short, but a dwarf in the truest sense. His arms were too long for his body, his legs barely carried him straight, and he had a crooked jaw from an accident long ago. He lived on the edge of the village, in a run-down cabin that smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. He was also poor, a carpenter barely surviving, with rough hands and soft eyes. When Lena first met him, she cried the whole way back to the house. Claudia wasn't moved. "You either marry him or I throw you out. No money, no food, no name. Choose." She chose. The wedding was small, rushed, almost shameful. No guests, no celebration. Lena wore a plain dress, no veil, and her heart felt like it was being buried, not joined. Baron barely spoke that day. He looked embarrassed, like he knew he was stealing something that didn't belong to him. The cabin was worse than she expected. One bed, one table, one window that barely let in light. Lena sat on the edge of the bed that night, stiff and silent, while Baron slept on the floor. He didn't even try to touch her. "Why did you agree?" "To this?" she asked in the dark. His voice came back low. "Because I owe your father my life. He once saved me when no one else would. I couldn't say no." Lena stared at the ceiling, trying to stop the tears from falling. Days turned into weeks. She didn't speak much, and Baron didn't push. He made her tea every morning, cooked simple meals, and carved little animals out of leftover wood just to leave them by her pillow. He never raised his voice, never touched her, and slowly things began to shift. One rainy afternoon, she found him in the back of the house, working on a strange wooden box. "What's that?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "A music box for you." "Why?" He looked away, blushing. "Because your smile is missing, and I wanted to find it." She didn't know what to say. Later that night, she opened the box. A soft tune played, broken in places, but beautiful. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. That night, she slept in the bed. Still, on opposite sides, still not touching, but something had changed, and Claudia would soon regret ever forcing her into this marriage. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp wood and the soft whistle of the wind sneaking through the cracks in the window pane. Lena woke up to find a warm mug of tea on the bedside table, steam curling into the air like it belonged to another world. Baron was already outside chopping wood, his back bent, his hands steady. She watched him for a moment through the dusty window, confused by the strange warmth blooming in her chest. He wasn't supposed to be kind. He wasn't supposed to be gentle. She had braced herself for roughness, cruelty, a man bitter at life who would take it out on her. But Baron was nothing like what she had been told to expect from a man, let alone one forced into marriage. He never asked anything from her. He never even looked at her like she was property, and that made her feel guiltier than hate ever could. Later, that day while he was out fixing the chicken coop, she wandered into his workroom. The air smelled like cedar and pine shavings. Half-finished carvings lined the shelves, tiny animals, little houses, even a crooked heart-shaped locket made from oak. In one corner, wrapped in cloth, was a figure. She pulled it gently from its covering. It was a carving of her, delicate, honest, not pretty like a doll, but real. Her hair swept back, her eyes carved with deep sadness. She dropped it as if it burned her fingers. That night they ate in silence, like always. She kept glancing at him, wondering what kind of man carved his wife's pain into wood, but never once mentioned it. "Baron," she finally said, her voice soft, "why did you carve me like that?" He looked up slowly. "Because I see you, and I don't want to pretend I don't." His words stayed with her all night. The next morning she asked to help him with the chores. He didn't say anything at first, just handed her a small axe and led her to the shed. They chopped wood side by side, and though her hands blistered and her arms ached, she didn't complain. Something about the rhythm of it all, the swing, the crack, the breath, felt more honest than any day she had spent in her stepmother's mansion. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, Baron brought out a second stool and placed it next to his by the fire. She sat without hesitation. "I never thanked you," she said, wrapping her hands around the tea he had made. "You don't owe me anything, Lena." "I think I do," she whispered, "for not being what I expected." He looked at her then, really looked. "I'm not sure I'm what anyone expects." A week passed, then two. Slowly, Lena found herself laughing, smiling, asking questions. She learned that Baron had once been engaged, years ago, but the woman left him when her family found out he had no land. She also learned that he sang to himself when he worked, off-key but full of heart. Then one evening a knock came at the door. Lena opened it and nearly collapsed. It was Claudia, dressed in furs, dripping jewels, standing on their porch like royalty had come to mock the poor. Her eyes scanned the cabin with disgust before landing on Lena. "Well," she sneered, "you look rustic. What are you doing here?" "I came to see if my investment is still breathing. I must say I didn't expect you to last this long." Baron stepped forward, quiet but steady. "She's not your property." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "No? Then maybe you should ask your wife about her inheritance." Lena froze. "What are you talking about?" Claudia's smile was cold. "Oh, sweet girl. Did no one tell you? Your father left a trust. Locked until your 18th birthday. Which is, next week, isn't it? I suppose I forgot. My. Lena's hands trembled. "You lied. You said he left nothing." "Of course I did," Claudia said smoothly. "Why give money to a child when I could use it better? But now that you're of age, well, the bank will call, and if you're smart, you'll come back with me. Use that money properly. Leave this little mudhole behind." Lena looked at Baron, then back at Claudia. "I'd rather burn it all than give you a coin." Claudia blinked. Lena stepped forward, her voice firmer than it had ever been. "You forced me into this marriage thinking you were ruining me, but I've never felt more free in my life. So go back to your cold house, your lies, your miserable little world. And if I ever see you again, I swear you'll regret it." She slammed the door shut. Baron stared at her. She turned to him. "You were right, I don't owe her anything, but I think I owe myself a chance to be happy." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the cold night came creeping in. But inside, for the first time since her father died, Lena felt warm. The days after Claudia's visit passed in a quiet storm. Lena's mind couldn't let go of the words her stepmother had spoken. Inheritance. The truth was, Lena had never cared much for money before, not until it was taken from her, twisted and hidden and used against her. Now, it wasn't about the gold or the estate. It was about dignity, justice. Baron noticed the shift in her. She wasn't broken like before. She moved with a purpose now, her voice steadier, her eyes sharper. One morning over tea, he finally asked, "Are you going to claim it?" Lena looked up from the cracked mug in her hands. Yes. She expected him to be happy, or proud, maybe even afraid. but he just nodded as if it made sense, as if he trusted whatever she chose. That meant more to her than she could say, but stepping back into that world meant preparing for war. They walked together into town the following week, hand in hand, her 18th birthday heavy in the air. People stared, whispered. Some even laughed at her, at him, at the image of the rich man's daughter choosing to walk with a poor dwarf by her side. Lena didn't flinch. At the bank, the manager nearly choked when he saw her name. He scurried back with paperwork, hands trembling, face pale. Yes, Miss Fairwick, there is indeed a trust. Activated today. She signed her name with a hand that didn't shake. Claudia's ghost was nowhere to be seen in that room. The amount was larger than she had ever imagined, but instead of joy, it filled her with a deep, burning resolve. She didn't need revenge. She needed to build something her father would have been proud of, something no one could take from her. Outside the bank, Baron waited with his hands in his pockets. "It's done," she said. "And now? Now I build a life, with or without the world's approval." They returned to the cabin that day with bread, fresh fruits, and new tools for Baron's workshop. That night, they ate by the fire like they were kings in a palace made of bark and laughter. But peace is never a guest that stays long. The following week, a letter arrived. The seal was familiar, her father's estate. It read, "You are summoned to attend a reading of Samuel Fairwick's full will and testament. Attendance mandatory by blood right." Claudia Fairwick also notified. Lena's hands clenched the paper. She's not finished, she wants to contest it. Or she knows something I don't. Baron placed his hand gently over hers. "Then let's find out." The next day, they dressed in their best, which still wasn't much. Lena wore a simple cream dress, her hair braided back. Baron wore a clean shirt, his boots polished. As they approached the old manor, people stood by the gates, former friends of her father, servants who'd been dismissed by Claudia, neighbors who now acted like they'd always cared. Claudia stood on the steps in her velvet gown, fake grief wrapped around her like perfume, but her eyes, sharp, vulture-like, landed on Baron first, then Lena, and narrowed with venom. "Bringing your pet to a family event, Lena?" she hissed under her breath. Lena didn't even blink. Better a pet than a parasite. Inside, the air smelled like dust and faded memories. The lawyer, an old man with a bald head and watery eyes, began to read the will. Property, jewelry, shares, all designated. And then came the surprise. "To my daughter, Lena, I leave not only the trust, but full ownership of the Fairwick estate, including this house, on the condition that she not sell it for 10 years. Claudia stood up, trembling. "He promised me the house. He said..." The lawyer cleared his throat. "And to my wife, Claudia, I leave a monthly stipend of 100 silver, conditional on her vacating the property within 30 days of this reading." Claudia turned red. He hated me that much. The lawyer didn't respond. He just folded the will, packed his bag, and left the room without another word. For the first time, Claudia had nothing to say. Lena stood in the middle of that grand, old room now hers, and didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to Baron. "You once told me you owed my father, but now I do too, because somehow, even after death, he saved me again." Baron's eyes softened. He gave, "You the door, you walk through it." They spent that night back in the cabin again, not in the mansion. That would come later. For now they belonged to the simplicity of firewood, quiet rooms, and honest love. But far from over, something darker had begun to stir in Claudia's eyes as she left the estate that day. She'd lost the house, yes, but not her venom. And vengeance, when bitter and cornered, was a dangerous thing. Winter came early that year. The trees shed their gold too quickly, and the wind sharpened like a knife. Lena moved back into her father's estate only weeks after the will was settled. But she didn't come back alone. Baron came with her, not as a servant, not hidden in the shadows, but as her husband. It was the scandal of the town. People talked, loudly. She married him. A dwarf. She could have had anyone. Why choose the dirt? I give it a month before she comes to her senses. But Lena didn't flinch, and neither did Baron. The staff, once hand-picked by Claudia, eyed Baron with disdain. The gardener refused to take orders from him. The cook never spoke above a grunt. The butler, an old man loyal to Claudia, made it a point to ignore him entirely. Lena noticed everything, but she also knew respect wasn't given, it was earned. So she made Baron her partner in every decision. If the roof leaked, Baron oversaw the repairs. If the servants had complaints, Baron listened. If a problem needed fixing, they brought it to him, and he always found a way. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with purpose. Slowly, people stopped laughing behind their hands, until Claudia returned. She came back under the guise of peace, offering civility, smiles, and something she claimed was an olive branch. But even snakes smile when they're ready to strike. One evening she arrived uninvited. Lena found her sitting in the parlor, sipping tea like she'd never been evicted. "I see the place hasn't completely fallen apart," Claudia said, glancing around. "I half expected broken furniture and goat milk on the table." Lena didn't entertain the bait. "What do you want?" Claudia leaned back, crossing her legs. "You think you've won, that this life, this little marriage makes you powerful, but you're still just a girl playing house with a man who doesn't belong in rooms like this. I don't need your approval or your permission." "Oh, darling," Claudia said with a laugh, "I'm not here to give it. I'm here to warn you." Baron walked into the room then, quiet as always. He didn't say anything, just looked at Claudia like a farmer watches a storm cloud on the horizon. She smiled at him sweetly. "Still silent, You always were good at keeping your head down." Baron didn't answer. Lena stepped between them. "You've made your threats, now leave." Claudia stood, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "Be careful, dear. This house might have your name on it, but names can be burned. And sometimes it only takes one spark." After she left, Lena turned to Baron. "She's planning something." "She's always planning something," he said. "But now she's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." He was right. The very next morning, the sheriff arrived with a folded paper and a bitter look. "There's been a report," he said stiffly, "accusing your husband of theft." Lena laughed. "Theft? From who?" "From Claudia Fairwick. She claims Baron stole an heirloom when he moved into this house." Baron's jaw tightened. "That's a lie." The sheriff didn't look convinced. "I'm required to search the premises." Lena stood her ground. "Then search. But if you don't find anything, I expect you to investigate who made the false report." The search lasted 3 hours, and in the end, they did find something. A necklace, gold, embedded with a large ruby, stuffed beneath the floorboard in Baron's workshop. Lena stared at it in horror. The sheriff looked grim. "It matches Claudia's description." "She planted it," Lena whispered. "I'll need to take him into custody," the sheriff said, "until we sort this out." Lena's voice rose. "He didn't steal anything." Baron placed a hand on her arm. "It's okay. It's not okay." "It will be," he said quietly, before turning to the sheriff and nodding. "Let's go." Lena watched as her husband was led away in chains. The servants watched from the windows. Claudia, no doubt, watched from the shadows. And Lena. Lena felt something inside her snap. They had taken her father, her freedom, tried to take her love. But this time they went too far. This time Lena would fight back and she wouldn't be kind. The night Baron was taken, Lena didn't sleep. She sat by the cold fireplace, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. The silence of the estate echoed louder than thunder. Everything they had built, every quiet joy, every slow step toward peace, shattered with the slamming of that cell door. She knew Claudia planted the necklace, but knowing it wasn't enough. She needed proof. At dawn, she rode into town. The streets were just waking up, and shopkeepers watched her from behind curtains. The sheriff's office sat squat on the corner, heavy with tension. When Lena entered, the deputy looked up, startled. "I want to see him," she said. "Miss Fairwick, he's not allowed visitors until—" "Try and stop me." Baron sat in the back cell, arms folded, head bowed. When he saw her, he stood, slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" Her voice broke. "For being set up by a monster. For bringing you into this life." Lena stepped closer to the bars. "Baron, if I had to do it all over again, even knowing what would happen, I would marry you every single time." His eyes softened, but he said nothing. "I'm going to clear your name," she whispered. "I swear it." She left without another word. Every second wasted in grief was another second Claudia won. Back at the estate, Lena searched everything, every drawer, every record, every letter. She needed something to prove Claudia had access to the necklace, that it wasn't even hers to begin with. Hours passed. Dust covered her arms. Her fingers burned. Then, buried in her father's old journals, she found it. A page from 4 years ago. Commissioned a custom ruby necklace for Lena's 16th birthday. Gold frame, heart-shaped setting. Claudia didn't approve, said it was too expensive for a child, ignored her. Lena's breath caught. The necklace wasn't Claudia's at all. It was hers. Her father had the receipt tucked between the pages. The next stop was the jeweler. "Do you remember making this, King?" she asked, placing the page in front of him. The old man adjusted his spectacles, then squinted. "Of course, that was a special order. Samuel Fairwick came in personally. Told me it was for his daughter. Refused to let his wife see it." "Did I keep any sketches?" The jeweler nodded slowly. "I always do." That evening, Lena returned to the sheriff's office with a folder thick with evidence. Her father's journal, the jeweler's sketch, the signed receipt. The sheriff rubbed his temples. "This changes things." "She framed him," Lena said. "She's obsessed with ruining him, because she couldn't break me." The sheriff stood. "We'll release him. I'll file the false report claim tomorrow." It wasn't enough for her. She wanted Claudia dragged through the mud, but for now Baron was free, and that was everything. When he stepped out of the cell, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Lena rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Let's go home," she whispered. That night they didn't speak much, just sat by the fire, hands intertwined. The warmth was different this time, not hopeful, not new. It was forged in battle, in pain, in defiance. But Claudia wasn't finished. A week later, Lena received an invitation, gold-trimmed, sent through the town's magistrate. Claudia was suing for defamation, accusing Lena of fraud, manipulation, and emotional distress. She claimed she was being harassed by a jealous stepdaughter. Lena laughed when she read it, not because it was funny, but because it was so typical. "She won't stop," she said to Baron. "She's going to keep coming. Lie after lie." Baron looked her in the eyes. "Then we don't just defend, we attack." And for the first time, Lena saw it in him, not just gentleness, but fire, rage, purpose. "You're not the only one she's ruined," he said. "I've stayed quiet too long." They started gathering names, old servants Claudia had fired, people she'd swindled, letters, proof, patterns of abuse, bribery, and blackmail. And Lena realized something. This wasn't just a fight for Baron or for herself. It was a reckoning, and Claudia had earned every blow that was coming. The trial was set for the end of the month, and by then, the town had chosen sides. Most watched from the sidelines, too afraid to speak. A few whispered support when no one else was listening. But there were also those who aligned with Claudia, not because they believed her lies, but because her power, her status, still frightened them. Lena didn't care anymore. She walked into that courtroom not as a girl mourning her father, not as a wife of a man the world mocked, but as a woman ready to tear down the last rotten pillar holding Claudia's world together. The courtroom smelled of ink, wood polish, and tension. Claudia sat on the other side, dressed in black like she was at a funeral, her lips painted red like blood. Her lawyer was a smug man with slicked back hair and a voice full of venom. Baron sat beside Lena, calm as ever, but his jaw was tight and his fingers tapped against his knee. The judge, an old man with tired eyes, read the charges slowly. Claudia's lawyer began first, painting a picture of a manipulative girl who had tricked her dying father into signing over the estate. He described Baron as a suspicious outsider who had influenced her mind, a man of low character and questionable means. Lena sat silent through it all, eyes cold. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer, a younger woman named Maris, stood with steady grace. She began not with the will, but with Claudia herself. The string of former servants who came to testify shocked the crowd. "I was dismissed when I refused to lock Miss Lena in her room," said one maid, voice shaking. "She made me lie to the doctor about Mr. Fairwick's medicine dosage," added the old cook. A butler testified about forged letters Claudia wrote pretending to be Lena, just to cut her off from any family allies. Then came the financial records. Claudia had been draining estate funds for years. And finally Lena took the stand. Her voice didn't tremble. Her spine stayed straight. "She forced me to marry Baron because she thought it would humiliate me. She told me I was a burden, that no man would ever want me unless I came with a price. But that man she forced on me. He treated me with more dignity and love than anyone in that cold house ever did." The courtroom was silent. Lena continued, eyes locked on Claudia. "You tried to break me, and when I didn't shatter, you tried to destroy the one good thing I had left. But I'm done being afraid of you." Then Maris revealed the final blow, the necklace, its origins, the proof, the receipt, the jeweler's testimony, the journal. Claudia's face drained of color. In the crowd, murmurs turned into gasps. The judge slammed his gavel. Enough. An hour later, the decision came down. The case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Claudia could never bring it back to court. The judge went further. A recommendation for investigation into fraud, false reporting, and financial abuse against Claudia herself. As the courtroom emptied, Claudia sat frozen in her chair, face pale, hands trembling. Lena walked past her without a word. Baron took her hand, and for the first time the world saw them not as a scandal, not as a joke, but as something stronger, unbreakable. The weeks that followed were quiet, peaceful. The kind of quiet you earn, not the kind that hides things. They turned the estate into more than a home. Baron expanded his workshop and began training apprentices, men and women who had been cast aside by the town for being less than. Lena opened a school on the property for girls, especially those with no family or status. She called it the House of Second Chances, and as for Claudia, she was indicted on multiple counts of embezzlement. Her accounts were frozen. Her reputation collapsed. Those who once feared her turned their backs when she had no power left. Lena visited her only once, just before the trial. She didn't go to gloat, just to say one thing. "You made me marry him to punish me, but you gave me the only man who's ever loved me without asking for anything in return. You thought you cursed me, but you saved me." Claudia had no response, just silence, and that was the final victory. The seasons changed again, but this time they moved gently. Spring arrived like a long-forgotten friend, soft rain tapping on the windows, green pushing through the grey and the warmth of something new stirring in the soil. For the first time in years, Lena didn't dread the sunrise. She woke to Baron's quiet humming in the workshop, the smell of sawdust and cinnamon tea filling the air. They had rebuilt more than a house. They had carved a life from ashes, one slow day at a time. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. One afternoon, as she walked through the old hallways of the estate, her fingers trailing against the walls her father once touched, Lena stopped by a door she hadn't opened since the funeral. His study. She pushed it open. Dust danced in. The light and the room was still exactly as he'd left it. Books lining the walls. A globe frozen mid-spin. His favorite chair sitting with a small rip in the arm where he used to tug when deep in thought. She sat down, let herself cry. Not from sadness, but release. "Papa," she whispered, "I wish you could see me now. I thought you abandoned me when you died, but you didn't. You gave me everything, even him." She stayed in that room for hours. That night she and Baron lit a lantern and placed it in the garden where her father was buried beneath the cherry tree. They sat side by side, and she told Baron stories of her childhood, of climbing the garden wall, of reading under that same tree, of her mother's lullabies before cancer took her. Baron listened, not like someone trying to understand, but someone who already did. and for the first time, Lena said the words she had held in for so long. "I love you." Beren didn't smile or look surprised. He simply took her hand and said, "I know. I love you too." The next morning, Lena stood at the edge of the school grounds. The House of Second Chances had grown. There were now nearly 20 girls, orphans, daughters of laborers, even one child who had run from an arranged marriage, not unlike the one Lena had been forced into. She looked at them laughing in the sun, their hair tied in bright ribbons, hope flickering in their eyes, and she felt proud in a way no gold could ever match. Later that week, a young woman arrived at the estate. Her name was Annabel, 22, a former maid who had once worked for Claudia before being fired for disobedience. Lena welcomed her in and gave her work in the school. It was Annabel who brought news from town. Claudia had been officially sentenced. 5 years in prison, stripped of her estate claims, her social standing ruined. "I thought you'd want to know," Annabel said quietly. Lena said nothing for a moment, then nodded. "No one is born cruel," she finally said, "but some choose it. And they pay for it, in the end." Beren entered just as she said it, wiping his hands on a cloth, covered in wood stain. "You okay?" he asked. "I am now." That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Lena pulled out an old wooden box, the music box Beren had made during their first months of marriage. She wound it carefully. The same slightly off-key, beautiful tune filled the room, only now she heard it differently. It wasn't broken. It was real. Their story had never been about perfection. It was about surviving everything meant to break them and choosing each other anyway. They danced in the soft light of the fire, no music but the one in the box and the beating of their hearts. And in that moment, all the pain, all the betrayal, all the fear, it faded. Only love remained. Years passed, as they always do. The scandal faded, names forgotten, and whispers died with the wind. What remained were the things that mattered, the kind that couldn't be taken or twisted, a home built on truth, a marriage born in fire, and a legacy shaped by love. Lena stood in the garden one summer morning, her hands resting gently on her belly, now round with new life. The cherry tree above her rustled softly. It had grown taller, its branches heavier, blooming brighter every year. Just beneath it, a new bench had been added, carved by Beren's own hands. It read, "For every broken beginning that bloomed into beauty." The school had grown into a proper academy. People from other villages began sending their daughters to be taught, not just because of the quality of the education, but because of what the school stood for: survival, second chances, defiance. The House of Second Chances became a sanctuary. Beren's carpentry was no longer dismissed as peasant work. His furniture, crafted with raw honesty and carved stories, had become sought after by nobles and commoners alike. But he still worked with the same tools, from the same small shed, behind the estate, with his sleeves rolled up and dirt beneath his nails. Folk who once sneered at him now nodded respectfully when he passed. And Lena, once called foolish, rebellious, disgraced, was now honoured as Lady Fairwick, though she never let anyone call her that unless it came from respect and not tradition. But titles meant little to her. What mattered was the child growing. Inside her, the laughter in the school courtyard, the sound of Beren's hammer tapping gently on a new piece of oak. One evening, as the sun dipped into gold, Lena sat with Beren on the steps of the estate, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting on hers. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "I used to think you were a punishment," she said with a quiet laugh, "something meant to humiliate me, and I thought you were too fragile to survive a world like mine." She turned her head to look at him. "You still think that?" He smiled. "I think you're stronger than anyone I've ever known." They sat in silence for a while, watching as two of the schoolgirls ran by, chasing each other, skirts fluttering, hair untamed by rules. Then Lena whispered, "Do you think my father would be proud of the life we made?" Beren looked out at the estate, the trees, the school, the sky. Then at her. "I don't think proud even covers it." Their child came in early autumn, a girl with Lena's eyes and Beren's quiet, curious nature. They named her Solon, after the light that always returned after even the darkest nights. Claudia never returned. Her name became a ghost in the village, spoken only when warning others what bitterness could do to a person. The story of Lena and Baron, however, was told often, at weddings, in schools, around fires, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Because it reminded people that sometimes what looks like the end is only the crooked beginning of something holy. Because sometimes being forced into the worst moment of your life is the only path to finding everything you were meant to become. And because every town needs a story like theirs. To remember that love isn't always pretty, but the real kind. The kind that survives shame, poverty, cruelty, and lies. That love is made of iron and mercy, and it never, ever breaks.